This now, a report by air pollution expert Dr. Ranajit Sahu has found that South Africa's proposed 1,500 megawatts of new coal-powered electricity generation will cause significant air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. That's even if the cleanest technology currently available is used. Dr. Ranajit Sahu is joining us now to talk more about this. Doctor, a very good afternoon to you. Grateful for your time. So, is there no other way of doing this without the emission situation being so bad?
I'm afraid not. Thank you for having me. Inherently with coal combustion and generation of power, you do have a range of emissions starting from the mine to the transportation of the coal, the dealing with ash. But even at the power plant where you would burn that coal in the most common ways, you would generate significant amounts of pollution and greenhouse gases.
And Eskom said this week that it plans to reduce its coal-fired power output by between 8,000 to 12,000 megawatts over the next decade. Is that a realistic target?
Well, it depends. Obviously, the country is short of electricity. I mean, there is power outages and so on, so it has to be done while satisfying the needs of the country. And I'm not in a position to say how well they can accomplish that target. I've heard that number, but it's at the same time, the IRP is proposing 1,500 megawatts of new coal-fired power plants. So it's a little mixed messages.
You touched on this, of course, in your first response to me this afternoon about coal-powered electricity in this country. Is there any other way of South Africa meeting the pressing need for electricity when you look at load shedding and the ripple effects even economically without going the coal route?
There are. I think you've probably heard. I mean, renewable power, meaning from sources such as solar and wind, are being used more and more throughout the world, in the developed world and in the developing world. So that is certainly very viable technology now. The costs have come down, and they have obviously no fuel costs, and so they are very attractive right now than compared to a few years ago.
You say the cost of solar power has come down, but some have said it's not come down enough, especially in South Africa, when you look at just the vast area that would have to be covered.
The concentration of that power is also increasing. The efficiencies are increasing. There are different ways. There are photovoltaic. There are also other technologies with solar. It does require some land area, but the costs have to be looked at on equal footing. When you look at coal, there are also costs on the health side. There are costs of the impacts of the pollution. And when you look at a cost on an equal basis, then including the direct cost as well as the indirect cost to society, the renewable power does very well.
And when you look at the broader South African power production and provision plan, would you say it adequately deals not only with the need for power, but as well as the other considerations, especially climate-wise?
Well, in my view, the IRP does have elements where they have renewable and so on, so that addresses some of the needs for being sensitive to climate, and which is all the more reason why the 1,500 megawatts of coal seem to be disjointed in that discussion, because that has significant climate impacts for the foreseeable future. We are not there, and we probably will not be there for things called carbon capture from these plants in any kind of economic way for at least more than a decade. And it's been that way for several decades. People have talked about carbon capture to reduce the climate impacts of coal, but it is certainly not available today in any kind of economic form, and it's not expected to for the time period of the IRP, which is almost to 2030. There is nothing to give us confidence that that will happen. The record so far around the world is these plants that have tried, even in modest ways, to do carbon capture, have not been economic and have basically not expanded or shut down.
We've been reporting in the South African media about the air pollution effects in areas such as Mpumalanga, where many of the power production plants are based. But are you getting a sense that there's been a broader feeling, if you will, spreading to other parts of the country as well, where we're starting to see the quality of air deteriorate as a result of coal power production?
Yes, and obviously in the areas where there's a lot of mining of the coal, you have impacts not just from the coal power plant itself, but the mine, the transportation of the coal, and the handling of the ash after you've done the combustion in the plant. All of that generates significant amount of air pollution, particulate matter, fine particulate matter, air toxics, hazardous air pollutants, mercury emissions. Those things collectively are very significant in the areas that not only have the plant, but also the supporting facilities.
There's also some reporting today in the newspapers that government is perhaps again flirting with the idea of nuclear power in South Africa. Is that our best option?
Well, nuclear power has been in the mix, and different people have different feelings about it. But certainly from a carbon standpoint, nuclear power is very attractive. If society is comfortable with the safety aspects of nuclear power and the disposal of the spent nuclear fuel, and there are some promising technologies that have been tried. Certainly from a carbon standpoint, nuclear power does make a lot of sense.
I wonder, though, especially in the South African context, I think it happens in other countries as well, when you go as big as nuclear, and even if you're going to do a nationwide solar project for electricity, there's a lot of legal ground to be covered when it comes to the awarding of contracts and the like. How much is red tape at that level interfering with South Africa's ability to move towards cleaner energy generation?
That's a very good question, and unfortunately, I'm not sure I'm in the best position to answer. That's a very broad societal and policy and procurement question. I do know that specifically looking at coal, throwing it in the mix, you have to also look at, and you touched on air pollution, but there are also significant water impacts. And so you have to look at collectively for not just air and climate, but also water and the other forms of pollution, and do that comparison. I couldn't speak on the procurement side of things, but I know that on the environmental side of things, a renewable power does very well when you look at on an apples to apples comparison.
What do you say, Doctor, to people who are listening to this discussion? You say they are so tired of hearing the different discussions around energy generation because they feel each part of the energy generation industry is basically producing research that speaks to its advantage.
Well, that's the role of government, is to pull that together and make a policy decision that doesn't reflect a particular constituency, but what is good for the country as a whole, and which is the whole point of an integrated resource planning, where you look at all the different technologies, the merits and the drawbacks of the different technologies, and set a path forward that makes most sense given South Africa's context.
Dr. Ranajit Sahu, an air pollution expert, good to speak to you on Newsfeed PM, so thank you.